31st of October 1992, Halloween, Saturday night. BBC TV audiences sat down to watch what appeared to be a live presentation from BBC studios investigating paranormal experiences in a small close somewhere in London. There'd never been anything quite like this on TV before, but unknowingly, this drama, as it turned out to be, had a massive impact upon the shape of films and TV to come. Ghostwatch. Hello and welcome back to my world of stuff. My name is Paul Mounts. If you're new here, incidentally, why not like and subscribe? Press that subscribe button, give me a like, and stick around because there's loads of cult TV stuff on this channel, loads of retro stuff, and some new bits and pieces too. So if you are new, welcome and stick around. I often wish that I'd been at home Halloween 1992, sitting at home in front of the TV watching Ghostwatch. It's the sort of thing I would have watched if I had been at home. I probably missed it because at the time I was working as a mobile disc jockey, not the ravey-davey type of disc jockey, but sort of wedding parties and birthday parties and stuff. And I had a residency in a hotel just outside Cardiff, and almost certainly I was out that night, so didn't see the show. I can't be certain, but I suspect I video recorded it on a videotape, kids. Yeah, ask your grandparents. And I suspect that I watched it on Sunday morning. I can't remember that, but I'm sure I would have done, because this is almost certainly the sort of thing I would have been drawn towards like a moth to a flame. It was a show that completely blindsided the nation because it purported to be a live broadcast from the BBC studios in the style of things that the BBC did at the time, like Children in Need and Swap Shop and stuff like that. It had that homely studio feel about it. It was presented by Michael Parkinson, who of course at the time was possibly the most respected television journalist around. Co-hosted by Sarah Green and her then husband, the late Mike Smith, who were popular presenters on TV, did a lot of work on children's TV, and with some outside broadcast stuff done by Craig Charles, who's now well known to audiences from a few series of the comedy sci-fi hit Red Dwarf. And what this appeared to be, to people who tuned in on that Saturday night, was a genuine live broadcast investigating the paranormal. It wasn't. Anybody who watched it from the beginning might have noticed that there was a logo, a caption came up, Screen 1, which was a BBC drama strand at the time. And the credits, although it mentioned Michael Parkinson, Sarah Green and so on, there was a little credit which was only added the day before, incidentally, which said by Stephen Volk, who was the writer and creator of this show. That was added because the BBC were a little bit worried about the verisimilitude of this production and that it might disturb people who didn't realise it was actually a drama. And they felt that by adding a by credit, that would sort of alleviate people's fears that they were watching something real. Of course, they didn't take into account the fact that, such is the way of TV viewers, they didn't necessarily start watching from the beginning. They might have started watching 10, 15, 20 minutes in and watched what purported to be a live broadcast from the BBC investigating weird stuff going on in a residential house in London. The history of Ghostwatch is quite interesting. Stephen Volk was the writer of Ghostwatch. He is a writer who incidentally was born in Pontypridd, which is just down the road from me. He was always interested in the supernatural, anything arcane and peculiar. He was particularly inspired by a classic 1972 play by the great Nigel Neal called Stone Tape, which I will be reviewing in a future retro video on this channel. And that sort of set him off down a creative path to write his own dramas and write his own stories about the supernatural. You might remember in 2005 he created a really good ITV series, one of ITV's rare forays into my type of TV, called Afterlife, which was a very disturbing sort of horror psychodrama starring the great Leslie Sharp, one of my favourite actresses, and Andrew Lincoln, who went on to appear in The Walking Dead, of course. Ghostwatch, however, came about because Stephen Volk wrote a 6-part drama, which was, I suppose, a sort of a X-Files-y sort of thing about people investigating paranormal experiences. He tried to get this sold to the BBC, and his producer, Ruth Baumgarten, took it to the BBC, who weren't interested in a 6-part drama. They just weren't interested. BBC, British TV in general, has been always slightly averse to anything fantasy based, and I suppose we're lucky in a way that we've had as many fantasy TV shows as we've had over the years. But it's felt to be a niche area, and I think horror in particular is something that is, people have tender sensibilities about sometimes. The BBC weren't interested, but the producer went back to Stephen Volk and said, well, do you think this could be refashioned as a one-off 90-minute play, for example, for the Screen One strand? Stephen Volk thought, well, there's no way I can contract 6 episodes of drama into an hour and a half. But the 6th episode of his proposed series was always going to be a mock live TV broadcast, the culmination of the previous 5 episodes. So he refashioned his script into what became Ghostwatch. The show aired on Halloween in 1992, and as I said, purports to be a broadcast hosted by Michael Parkinson, investigating this phenomenon that took place in this, I think it's called Foxhall Road in London. The whole story is actually based on the Enfield haunting. You may be familiar with that from a bit of drama on TV a few years ago. I think the second Conjuring film was based around this. The story of this family, a mother and 2 children, who were disturbed by very bizarre and strange occurrences in and around their house. Things flying around, bodies being lifted into the air, just weird noises and weird sounds and voices. It's a story which still fascinates. It's still out there now. People still talk about it. It's often dramatised. And in fact, I just this week watched a documentary in a series called Hauntings on BBC iPlayer, which is about this whole story. It is a story that captured people's imaginations back in the 70s. And Stephen Volk based the screenplay of Ghostwatch about this. What makes it work? I've watched it again the last few days, and as I said, it's a 90-minute drama, and it is so immaculately made for the time. When you think it was made in 1992, it didn't have all the technologies that we have these days, but they made use of things like thermal imaging cameras and motion cameras, things that would have been cutting-edge technology at the time, to add this air of reality about the whole thing. It starts off almost as a jokey little BBC investigating something weird and supernatural, but we all think it's a bit of a lark. And it's all done quite lightheartedly. We meet Michael Parkinson, introduces the show. He's sitting in the studio with Lynn Pascoe. She's supposed to be a parapsychologist. Takes all this stuff very seriously. And Michael Parkinson's a little bit tongue-in-cheek when he talks to her about this stuff, because clearly he doesn't believe in the paranormal things. He thinks this is all a bit of a lark. We see Mike Smith, as was the tradition at the time of the BBC, standing in front of a bank of telephone operators who are picking up calls from the public. And interestingly, the BBC used the regular 0891 telephone number that they use for things like Going Live and Saturday Superstore and these things at the time, for people to phone in with their own true paranormal experiences. And apparently when people did phone in, they were reassured that what they were watching was a drama, but they were encouraged to leave their own supernatural experiences if they had them on the phone line. Then we had Sarah Green, who was out on location at Foxhall Road. She was going to go into the house with the family, spend the night there and see if anything weird happened. Outside in the street, you had Craig Charles doing his cheeky-chappy sort of stuff to camera, talking to experts, talking to the public who was standing nearby. And the whole thing built up across the 90 minutes. First of all, Sarah Green just meets the family, talks to them about what's happened, and then the weird stuff starts to happen. Bangs and crashes. At one point, it looks as if one of the daughters has actually made the whole thing up. But then it transpires that that's perhaps not the case. One of the most memorable features of the film is the character of Mr. Pipes. He's a character who they refer to because in the house they keep hearing the pipes banging, this banging, crashing sound. And Mr. Pipes, I know, terrified a generation, because anybody living in a house with the pipes banging and rattling automatically thought that Mr. Pipes had found their way into the house. As the film progresses, things get more and more creepy and more extraordinary and inexplicable, to the extent that in the last 20 minutes or so, I think it goes into some very dark territory when it appears that whatever unearthly forces in the house has manipulated the whole situation to create a seance to unleash it. And in the very last scenes, which you would think now looking at them, the audience would have thought, hang on, this can't be real. The whole studio goes crazy, lights explode, gets dark, people evacuate the studio. Michael Parkinson himself is left wandering around the studio, and then he himself appears to be possessed. You would think that's a step too far. Apparently not, because audiences watching at the time really believed this was all true. They were absolutely terrified. And as I said, that could be because they just didn't note the screen one and written by credit at the beginning, and why would they? Or they came on board a few minutes in and thought, this looks interesting. There was a lot of fuss about this afterwards. Apparently the BBC had 1 million complaints about this. I don't know what the viewing figures were. I think it must have done extremely well in a 3 or 4 channel environment. But it was there was a massive furore about it. The BBC, I think, had to issue all sorts of apologies. There was even a report of somebody who was so disturbed by it that he committed suicide a few weeks later because he heard some sounds in the pipes. And the BBC never repeated it. It's never been repeated, never been shown again. It has eventually resurfaced. It appeared on DVD a few years ago. It came out on Blu-ray, I think, last year. It's been shown in America. It's been shown on Shudder in America. It's had an afterlife of its own. But for a while, it was the BBC's guilty secret. And of course, as is the way, BBC took a lot of flack for it from cultural commentators who thought that they were pulling the wool over their licence payers' eyes. They were terrifying people. That was sort of the history of the show at the time. As I said, I watched it again a couple of nights ago. And of course, with the passage of time, TV production has changed. It wouldn't be done this way now. It's still, however, a very compelling, very strong and quite creepy piece when you watch it. I think I have watched a couple of documentaries about it as well. The way it was made is very interesting because Michael Parkinson, Sarah Green and Mike Smith, all this stuff was pre-recorded. The whole thing was pre-recorded. But they were allowed to ad-lib in character, as it were. So you never got the impression that they were acting, because they were. They had dialogue, but they were allowed to improvise and behave as they would be on another program they were doing, so that the viewer believed this was Sarah Green, this was Michael Parkinson, this is Mike Smith, Craig Charles, because they were all acting in the way that the audience knew them. They weren't reading dialogue that didn't sound like them, which I think would have given away the fact that it was a drama and not a real documentary. And that works very well because you do get lots of interplay between Mike Smith and Sarah Green quipping to the behind-the-scenes boys about the technology, just behaving the way that she was well known for at the time. Michael Parkinson too, he has that slight twinkling charm that he always had. Although his stuff is slightly more dialogue-y, there is a sense again that he's speaking off the cuff at times. He's being quite naturalistic, and that's what makes it work. The fact that although it is scripted, it's played realistically, and the cast, such as they are, go off piste quite a lot, and they improvise, and they just do things that they would do as themselves, which makes it work. There are places where the artifice doesn't really work on occasion, and I think there are times when they do speak slightly out of character. And as I said, it is dated in terms of its production. It wouldn't be done this way now, but I think it still holds up incredibly well. It's still a very powerful piece of work. And what I hadn't realised, and I've again only since researching it afterwards, and I didn't even notice watching it this week, that there are lots of appearances. Mr. Pipes does appear in certain scenes. It was so well crafted that his figure is in the background in certain scenes, and unless you watch it again and again, you won't see him. He's in your peripheral vision. He's in the corner of your eye. You don't register that he's there. But there are lots of little supernaturally bits that crop up throughout it, which I haven't seen, but I have only become aware of by having read about it on the last couple of days. It really is an extraordinary piece of work. Watching it today, you think BBC would never do this now. They would never take a chance on doing this now, because BBC takes a hammering all the time about every little thing, and they wouldn't, unfortunately, take a chance on putting out something like this that would invoke the ire of the anti-BBC lobby. But it's an extraordinary, influential piece, because although it wasn't at the time broadcast outside the UK, it was seen by a lot of people, and it's often said that Ghostwatch led to the found footage film phenomenon, which came along a few years later. This came along before Blair Witch Project. This, I'm sure, directly inspired all those tacky Most Haunted type shows where Yvette Fielding goes to haunted houses and I don't suppose much happens. And the whole found footage thing, Paranormal Activity, for example, the director of that, Oren Peli, eventually admitted that he was aware of Ghostwatch and he'd seen it, because it's all done with cameras looking into real places and weird things happening. And that's what found footage films were all about. Ghostwatch is incredibly influential. I don't think anybody who worked on it at the time realised that. And I think even now people look back at it with a fondness and then realise what it led to. what the chain of creativity it unleashed. It's still extremely powerful. It still has the capacity to chill. I think even now, and obviously I've seen it several times, you know it's a drama now. And I tried to put myself in the mindset of people watching it at the time. And as I said, I so wish I'd watched it at the time. I think I would have been savvy to know it was a drama, because I've always been interested in the making of TV and how it works and what goes on. And I keep an eye on the listings and I know what's coming or what's being made. I think I would have known about this. I wouldn't have been taken in. But it's fascinating to think that an audience sat down to watch this and absolutely believed that everything that was happening was true and real. And it's quite an achievement, and it all works because every part of it works. The reality of the outside broadcast stuff, it's all done in the way that the BBC did outside broadcast stuff at the time. The actors playing the parts, as I say, from Dr. Pascoe to the woman playing the mother and the two kids, are superb. They were actually sisters, which makes that dynamic work very well. Their performances aren't performances, they're realistic, they are naturalistic, and the naturalism of it is what makes it so successful and so memorable all these years later. It's absolutely groundbreaking piece of TV, and it's one that is worth watching in the Halloween season because it takes you back to that time when television was still able to shock and surprise in very special ways. Ghostwatch is not available on BBC iPlayer, surprisingly, but you can get it on DVD and Blu-ray, and I would recommend you pick it up if you've never seen it. It really is a landmark piece of television. If you've seen Ghostwatch, why not leave a comment down below, let me know what you thought of it. If you saw it at the time, I'd be interested in hearing from anybody who saw it at the time and was taken in by it or believed it was real. What was going through your mind at the time? Did it terrify you? Does it terrify you now? Does it scare you? If you think of the horror stuff that we have these days, it's sort of tame, but I always think that there's something much more disturbing about this sort of horror, the suggestion of horror, rather than the graphic stabbings and monsters. And much as I love the monster type stuff, I'm not one for stabby things, but the sort of horror which is the corner of your eye, the things that might be there, things in the shadows, much creepier than, front and centre, something that's there to give you a jump scare. And I think this is what Ghostwatch did so subtly and so beautifully. It's a very well-tempered piece of work. So I'd be interested to hear from anybody who saw it at the time and anybody who's seen it since and what their thoughts on it are. Right, thank you for watching. Hope you've enjoyed this video. Thank you again to all the new subscribers who've come on board. It is quite astonishing how many new people have come on board over the last few weeks, that I'm now over 1,000 subscribers. That's quite special. And I love you all, each and every one, and I hope you stick around for all the content that's to come. As I've said before, I am skewing now retro because that's the stuff that seems to be popular. But I will be doing some new films here and there, and I'll be doing Doctor Who stuff, of course. So plenty to come. Stick around. Yeah, keep taking the stuff.